Good morning or evening.
Hi, Jeremy.
How are you?
All right, thanks. How are you?
Good. Got a packed agenda today.
Yeah. So given the agenda is packed, perhaps we can get started since Arthur is there already. Yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
So wait, maybe I can share my screen.
And welcome everyone, by the way. Let's not skip that.
So the first subject I wanted to quickly talk about is that in the CAP, it's enforced to be this way, like the endpoint slice has strictly non-reference to a service import. But we had to differ from that in Cilium. And I wanted to see if there was a way to maybe slightly change the CAP to loosen some of these constraints. Basically, what we do is that the service import create the derived services, and then the endpoint slice is linked in terms of owner reference to the services. This is helpful to us because the endpoint slice generation is separated from the MCS API support. So basically, if we don't have MCS API, the user just have to add this annotation, global sync endpoint slice, and then it start creating endpoint slice. So yeah, I was wondering if you had any opinion how, if it would be possible to update the CAP and in what way we could do that. I'm not sure if anyone has opinion on this.
I'm trying to remember what the reason for the owner reference was. I suspect it's just so that the endpoint slices are deleted when the service import's deleted.
I believe so. Yeah.
That was my question. Is like, what's the specific modification that you're asking for? Is it to remove the mandatory owner ref?
These are have it a way to link it to the service, but I'm not sure how it would go in the conformance test and stuff like that. Because basically the feature on the well, user side, feature side, it's quite equivalent because I have the labels that link to this service import here. And the owner reference is here, which has also an owner reference in here. So it's the same, but it's one direction in between.
Yeah, so if the service import is deleted, then the service is deleted and the endpoint slice is deleted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't see any reason that would cause issues.
Me neither. Yeah, I think we did only add that to ensure proper cleanup.
And so let's say this is allowed. How would we phrase in the cap to still have some service import, but not necessarily the service, still have some owner reference, but not necessarily service import? Like must have one.
Yeah,
sorry.
if we just say, well, it currently says endpoint slices will have an owner reference to their associated service imports. If we just say add a with possible indirection or something like that.
Do we need to even say that?
I think just like add the word should, or like.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, so the well, if we change it to should, then that means the endpoint slices could have no owner reference at all.
So maybe should or should have an owner ref, blah blah blah, or other appropriate cleanup mechanism or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So I was going to suggest.
Is that actually a fundamental problem? Like, you should clean up the endpoint slices because otherwise you potentially waste them. But that seems like implementation level, like good practices.
Yeah.
Honestly, saying how, like we said owner ref because that's the Kubernetes way to do it, and that's normally what you want. But there are other valid ways to manage cleanup. I don't believe that there's any actual problem with orphaned endpoint slices existing. So I wonder if the KEP may be slightly overreaching just because you probably want to do this.
Yeah.
So maybe rephrase it to just that the endpoint slice must be removed when the service import is removed. And step away from the actual mechanism of that.
Yeah, we could leave a hint to owner ref, because of good practice, but.
Okay, I will try to find some nice sentence that does something like that, and
cool.
We'll see.
Wordsmithing, but yeah, it doesn't seem like too big a change.
Well, I mean, the main context here was that, of course, I want to be conformant, but the second thing is conformance test is a free end-to-end test, right? So I will probably add that in CI, and yeah. Should I go on my second subject, maybe?
Yeah, I think for conformance, we should just be checking when service import is removed, are the endpoint slices also deleted? And that way, the implementation of however that is handled doesn't really matter as long as it happens.
Sounds good. Okay, so second discussion is well, about service export condition. So I asked in Slack like a bit more than a week ago, and one of the Submariner dev answered also that they were not following the cap. So basically, if you have a conflict, whatever that is, on a service, and you have this configuration, for instance, 3 cluster, one local, usually the cluster that you are looking to, oldest, let's say it has the oldest service export always, and one conflict with oldest. So in the CAP, it's enforced this way, that you have one service export conflict condition on every service export. And well, Submariner is not able technically to raise service export condition everywhere. And while developing Serum, I was wondering if one of these would be better from like a pure UX perspective. We don't have any technical constraint, but yeah, like maybe if you were to not have a service export condition here, you could like safely ignore it when a user checks every of its cluster to, I don't know, resolve conflict and stuff like that. So I don't know if what I explained was clear enough, or if you have any like comments.
Well, the reasoning for this originally was trying to maintain the property that you don't have to be aware of, or a consumer should not have to be aware of which cluster they're in. The idea of preferring like local configuration means that you kind of do, right? The cluster in which a consumer is located would impact how it sees a service, and probably encourage interesting behaviors based on that. The oldest wasn't meant to be like for correctness, because time in a distributed system is somewhat squishy, but just so that you could actually look at all of the current configurations and intuit the behavior. Basically picking something that at least based on a snapshot of state would be predictable, instead of something that's kind of random, if that makes sense.
That kind of makes sense, but here we are not talking about how the conflict is resolved, right? Just how it's exposed to the user, right?
So I have one shot. I think I like the original way, because if I want to find out whether there's a conflict, then I need to find the right cluster to find the conflict. That will be really hard. Like when I look at a service, unless I know like which cluster is conflicting. Otherwise, how do I find out what is the conflict information?
You mean like you lack the ability to see on any cluster that export this service if there is conflict, and not on the...
Yeah, basically, as a user, it's very hard for me, as a user of multi-cluster, right? It's very hard for me to find out whether there's a conflict, because now I need to first find which cluster has a conflict, then go to that cluster, then see the conflict.
Right. Like the idea is that in MCS, all services are peers. So if there's a conflict anywhere, the service is not in a healthy state. And then, but we went through the original proposal for conflict resolution was to try to get to something that would hopefully be at least semi-functional in this broken state, because that's better than an outage.
Okay, I see.
Like
Yeah.
MCS, there should never be a steady state in MCS when various exporting services of the same name in the same namespace disagree. That's just misconfiguration. That's kind of the thinking.
But okay, I maybe have one counter argument, is that usually, well, on the CAP, it's also suggested that when you have a conflict condition, you say how many clusters agree with you and which one is the winning one. But if you go on the local cluster, it would say like, well, 2 out of 3 clusters agree with you, oldest is the winning one, but you have no idea if you have a conflict on your local exporting services. Does that make sense? Like producing.
But can you not see the imported state and compare that to what is being exported?
You could, but it's an extra step. Maybe it's just a UX problem, and we should like slightly change the sentence that is exposed to the user. Like just
Yeah, I'm all
adding.
for adding more information if it helps debug.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I might try to like add something like local cluster agree with oldest or something like that, or I don't know. I think that would help. Well, if no one has other comment, or if someone agree with what we just said, feel free to comment, but else I think I'm done with this subject. Okay. Let me share my screen.
Yeah, thanks. Next up on the agenda is Ryan.
Hello. Hello. Okay, so this is kind of the long overdue description of what we did in the KubeCon. We made a demo that is kind of as a proof of concept of the KEP cluster credentials cap experiment enhancement there. Let me see if I can share. Oh, okay. Okay, I think we can see. So this is I sent a link. Oops. I sent a link in the document. Unfortunately, this link is it's a KubeCon Hong Kong, but they decided to speak Chinese alone. So I think it may not be very helpful for anyone who has who can somehow understand or use some kind of translation tools can take a look. So the code is here. Actually, it's here. The demo, basically what we did was we actually kind of implemented both the auth token request and the class profile integration. So here we showed the class profile APIs, and we also implemented this is our fleet private branch. So we actually implemented an auth token request. So this auth token request, basically, I think there is an example, but in the spec, you can see that it tells you which cluster profile it target, and we just use a service account name and service account. Basically, we are going to create a service account in the member cluster, or the whatever you call it, leaf cluster, workload cluster. And also we allow user to specify what kind of role binding cluster roles they want. So this is the like author token request part. So if user on the hub cluster side issue this API, we are going to create. Of course, this is a demo, so there are lots of security bypass that we just basically are going to assign that request and create the cluster profile, which has the credentials inside in the cluster profile, corresponding cluster profile. We have a credentials part, just like similar to what we propose in the KEP. And so that this is automatically created for the cluster profile. And in the demo, this is a demo with actually it's integration with the Q project. So after users specify this, again, it's in Chinese. It's kind of hard to show the yeah. So this is the token request API, which we say we're going to target the cluster code. For example, here is a Brave line, and by the way, I can yeah. me see if I can show. Yeah, here. Then this is the cluster profile. So after we initialize send out that token request, the cluster profile corresponding cluster profile would have this oh, this is not there yet. I think this is still at the beginning. It's so okay. So this is the token request. So initially we have this. Oh, I can't find it. So I cannot find it anymore. So initially we have the cluster profile, and then we have someone will do this. Will do the request. Then the token request is assigned basically, and then we generate that basically the Kubi config, and then we integrate with Q. When the Q, yeah. So when the Q comes, we have an integration with the cluster profile API with the Q natively. Of course, we kind of hacked the Q, forked it, and added this capability to the Q project, so that when this Q create called, for example, it's called Brave Line, we will automatically integrate that with the cluster profile API, and so that the entire queue system doesn't have to do any provision. So the multi-queue users doesn't have to do any provisions. You can see that this whole multi-cluster has this multi-cluster queue is automatically configured. So this is kind of the high level idea of how we can integrate with third-party applications. Of course, again, this is there are a lot of forked code. It's none of them are merged into the upstream, but we kind of demonstrate the idea, this seamless integration with multi-cluster system if the application and the multi-cluster system both support cluster profile. And if you compare with the original manual way to set up the multi-queue, you will see it's like 10 minutes or maybe 15 minutes of manually Kubi do tons of stuff. But here now it's basically just one line command that you can add extra cluster into this multi-queue. This is kind of the idea. So the code is here. I can paste this in the chat if anyone is interested. It's hard for me to explain this in this short period of time, and especially without yeah, this is basically a real, it's a prototype integration. And let me see. Yeah, just one more thing is we also added a description for the cluster profile API into our main project, because we had only 5 APIs, I think, or 4, I forget. So this is the actual one. Please take a look. This is basically just some docs to put the cluster profile into our multi-cluster 6 main page. Currently, if you look at this, I think, yeah, there's only maybe 3. I thought there 4. Yeah, so we will have actual one. The cluster profile will be somewhere here. That is the PR for this. Yeah, any questions?
I have a question. The GK, the auth, so not GK, the auth request, did that live on the workload cluster or on the fleet cluster?
On the fleet cluster or the hub cluster, the central cluster.
Okay. So that was your effectively your that was your application registration then. That was how you declared that you wanted credentials.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how application kind of, most of the worker or the integration, the interface between any application or even administrators through the multi-cluster system is through the hub cluster. They don't normally need to go to the leaf cluster, member cluster, or whatever.
In the auth, can you? I don't know if you had the auth one again. The auth one you requested, you said, "Oh, I wanted credentials." Did you say the RBAC you wanted in the cluster too?
Yeah. Here, this is the, so you put the row and the cluster rows. Yeah, it's kind of like the really the most straightforward way to spell out what's like in a Kubernetes native way to say what this service, basically this service account, what kind of credential what kind of permission it should have.
And this registration mechanism has to be in the same namespace as the cluster profile then?
This
or does it matter where it is?
It doesn't really, because this is, I think, but again, this is just a demo implementation.
Right.
This is, I think, is a namespace reference, so it can cross namespace reference. It doesn't have to be the request token doesn't need to be the same namespace as the cluster profile. But again, it's something we could we never in the by the way, just to make sure the cap this PR doesn't touch the doesn't touch the author request part at all.
Part, yeah.
But
I think it's a key part, I think, for the credentials. That's why I've been like wrestling with the credentials, because I'm like, okay, where does it come from? Who's taking care of it, and what's the authority to create it?
Yeah, this is kind of the magic part.
This is the authority ultimately, right?
Yeah, this is the magic part. Saves. So without this, a lot of the queue stuff still need to, like the whole menu steps still need to be repeated without this step. This step saves like the 80% of the saving coming from this. 20% probably is coming from the cluster profile API integration with that credential connection. But we are not talking about that yet. Just to be clear, we just wanna at least for now get this part so that at least manually there's a way we can integrate with any applications like Q, Argo CD. We can now start to talk to them to integrate, because as I said, we hacked the Q project to have this kind of automatically take this cluster profile API's credential and then automatically put into their multi Q cluster. This part cannot be done without cluster API has that credential inside it. Without that, we cannot do any of those hacks there. So we need that at least, so that for the third-party integration part, this will unblock the third-party integration part. The whole flow needs somehow, somewhere needs a credential signing, something like that. But yeah, just want to separate these two parts.
Yeah, you can. I've been also playing with something called composition that they're doing in some other project, and you can easily write like a templating to convert like our cube cluster profile to whatever the application's taking. So I was playing. I'll present it some other day, but like translate the cluster profile into an Argo CD secret, for example. I've been doing that. And that could remove the need to have to modify, having to modify a queue itself. You could just have that little conversion on the fly. But yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think the only thing for me right now is like finding is just like if you have the ability to write this auth object, this auth token request, then you basically have access to the full workload cluster and the ability to get really full like cluster admin on those.
Yeah, that's the again, that's the part, as I mentioned, like when we don't want to sign any request, right? Basically, if we just blindly sign anything, then anybody becomes full admin on any cluster. So definitely that's not, again, this is demo. We need to hash out kind
of. But I'd be curious, like how do we protect those auth requests really? Where are they supposed to live on that same cluster, or should we put them somewhere else and suggest somewhere else? Or I think that was like, because it's similar. I think you guys implement that's awesome. Like what I presented last time also is in that vein, and the feedback I think we got is like, what is actually running this? Where is this controller running that does the actuation of the auth request, and do we trust the auth request? I think I also got in there is, can you?
So the controller actually do need kind of admin permission on pretty much every cluster. It's the whoever signs that actually is the controller. The controller does have effectively the admin credential permission on every cluster. But it doesn't mean that who asked for that would always get granted, right? That I think that is the, at least in my mind currently, that's where we can put in a putting a security block there to make sure not everybody can ask for anything. But how is totally different. It's again outside of this KEP and our current discussion. We're not. So this is just so that the demo looks more complete. Any other questions?
Yeah, so I was wondering then, did you run into any issues with the proposed changes as they currently stand, or does this validate everything that's in the outstanding PRs?
Yeah, because the our proposal is actually a small part of this demo. So yeah, so it's not, we didn't hit any issues. Yeah, lots of issues we hit were more technical issues, how to integrate with queue, change queue stuff, in off token part. But none of them, again, is part of this PR. This PR was just adding a field into, or some fields into into our conditions, into our status, so that user have a way to integrate with with our system. Yeah. And if they need to use a push model, and I think that there was some comments on push and pull. If they use pull model in the sense that the hub cluster sitting on their control doesn't need to basically talk to the member cluster, the API server, then they don't even need this. But Argo CD, most of the open source project we encountered actually is using a push model. It basically means they need to talk to the API server, which probably isn't the best way, but that's how it is, what it is. Then they need this kind of credential to talk to them. Yeah, please take another look at the PR if you get a chance. And feel free to ping me or ping me or someone in the team on the Slack channel of any questions.
Side question: are you planning on making a CAP PR for the off token request too?
Not yet. We're not ready. I don't think we had enough discussion on that part yet.
And do you think we can ship the credentials one without the off token request?
Yeah,
like
definitely.
On the two sides of the same coin, can we really have only one half?
Yeah, is at least, again, my thought was this: with the credential in the cluster profile, we now can start to have integration work with different applications. It's just not complete. It's still kind of manual. So the authorization or token side is manual. But then when that manual part is done, and that is only done once on the multi-cluster system part. It's not done actually on the application side. So we could do this for, it depends. It depends if there are two different applications. But it's going, creating the off token part or whatever credential part is done through the multi-cluster system part. For the application to integrate with that, there's no extra work. That's my at least my mental model is like that. So definitely this is useful. Without this, we cannot move to we cannot go talk, we cannot present. So the idea was, after this is done, we are going to talk to Argo CD or Q. Q has this work group batch. We'll probably plan to present something there and sort their either agreement or sort their input on further integrate with Q. And Argo CD, I don't know what's there. We have some we know some maintainers there. They also look interested in this, so we are going to talk to them, and so that at least this can unblock the progress. And then at the same time, we in this SIG we could continue to discuss the automation part to get the credentials created, things like that. We're just not, at least I don't think we have had enough discussion on that part yet. But we're definitely, it's kind of like, we can do that in parallel.
Yeah, and a comment I put in there also is I think it'd be good to have the endpoint, like the endpoint part of the credentials, put in the cluster profile, because for applications that are not configured, maybe via this full like kubeconfig credentials part, if they use workload identity, they actually just need the endpoint if they assume RBAC is already set for them.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I don't like those. I have no strong opinion. Community, whatever the community agrees, that's fine. At a endpoint, we don't have that now, right?
No, because I think right now you assume that per application you're writing a kubeconfig, roughly.
Yeah. So yeah,
but if you had the endpoint shared for everyone, they could set their own, assuming they don't need credentials to be generated for them, and can use a workload like federated workload identity.
Yeah,
and that RBAC is set already. That's like the hard assumption.
So you basically here you just want to add a. I don't know if you want to add it here or you add it into each consumer.
It could be in the state, so, not in the state. I guess in the spec of the cluster itself, you could have a list of endpoints.
Spec of the cluster, in the spec of the cluster.
Because it's shared for all of them, right?
For sharing, you can still put it into the credential part. Just don't put it into each individual one. So you can put it into, or even not even credential. You can put it as a property or put it at.
Yeah, exactly. That would be a property likely. Yeah.
Or something. Anyway, it's fine. But in the spec is a little bit different because most of them are, this object pretty much is a status object.
Yeah.
So anything in status, at least to me, is fine. Yeah.
Yeah,
only thing is
fine.
Yeah, only thing is I'm not sure. Yeah, either it's a property or it's whether it will always be the same or there will be different endpoints for different applications.
It would be the same. I think it could be different types of endpoint, like an internal endpoint, an external endpoint.
Yeah,
that kind of things, like direct API server or through the cloud or something like that.
Exactly.
So it could be different types of endpoints, so maybe there would be different properties.
Yeah, exactly.
But at least it could be usable by different application.
Yeah, just one last thing is after this, we plan to start to really tackle the property side. So property is actually the real benefit of this API. Is we need to expose, need to decide what are the. This is actually a good segue to that. We could start to decide what are the basically standard properties every agent needs to provide, and then what is the core properties everybody needs to implement and provide. What is the standard ones? We have we make sure that we have layout definitions. You can opt to implement or not, but if you implement, it has to be this way. And then there's optionals, like, or whatever you call extensions. Then everybody can think of different ways. The API endpoint probably is one of the core ones if we want to decide that is a property we need to support. And also things like another very popular one is someone, I think Mike asked about whether we should integrate with ADRs, dynamic DRA, whatever that is called, dynamic
DRA,
resource,
yeah.
DRA, yeah, dynamic resource allocations, right? And they have this resource slice. That's something that we may just borrow it so that we are aware of many kind of multi-cluster AI projects. They need to know how many clusters, how many GPUs, not total, not aggregated. I think we had that discussion even way before with when the NVIDIA guys. Just total GPU or whatever resource is not pretty much useless. They need to know exactly the type of GPU, how many of them on each node, things like that, in order for the meta scheduler to actually schedule tasks onto those clusters. So things like that. I think that's actually becoming exciting. Currently, they are kind of like bullet point stuff, right? When we get to the property, that's when it gets to really useful stuff.
I'm curious when we get to that kind of property, like the resource-based ones, how dynamic we expect it to be, because it sounds like capacity and resource management is going to be quite dynamic, and I don't know if we'll be able to keep up with that.
Yeah, it's a different another can of worm, but I'm excited to open that and see what it looks like.
And property right now is allow listed. That's a set of keys we only allow, right? Or did we?
No,
like,
we
do
only
want the keys and values
in the cap only. I think we spelled out just a few of them that.
But those are examples or the only one available?
In the cap, we actually spelled it. I don't remember where we spelled. We spelled a few of them, but we didn't get into details. We
I think only a few are well defined, and others are allowed. I forget if we're doing what we did over Gateway API, where we have like a requirement to like domain prefix custom ones or something like that to basically avoid conflicts if we add more to the well-known ones later.
Yeah, I think we will have to start go down that route as we start to spell out the core standard extension part. It probably needs to be domain prefixed so that
for the custom ones,
so that it's ours, and then the customer can do their stuff.
I just didn't know if the CRD allowed it, like the current way of the CRD, current definition. I don't know if it allowed arbitrary keys, prefixed obviously, but arbitrary keys.
Yeah, currently yes. I don't think we're putting any. Let's see.
So it's fine. I mean, I was playing with it. I was using annotation. I didn't even go there.
Oh yeah, we put it into the CRDs.
Like,
I cannot find it, but but I'll double check. Okay. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Ryan. Next up is Mike.
Yeah, so I basically had some questions about the mechanics of doing a breaking change from the v1 alpha 1 to v1 alpha 2 for service import. I'm honestly more familiar with like how you do a safe step transition because that's the thing that we tend to try to do more. I have not done a breaking change for anything. Basically what we have is service export is going to be identical in v1 alpha 2. There's no changes happening to that, and that's where a user is intended to like author their configuration. We want to preserve that one so that nothing hopefully breaks for the user. And I don't know if that means keeping v1 alpha 1 and v1 alpha 2 and setting 1 as the storage version, or if it's okay to jump directly to v1 alpha 2 as a storage version there. I know there's some caution against that somewhere in the docs. And then for service import, it's basically the opposite situation where we expect that nobody is writing those manually, and it should be okay for them to be blown away and have data loss or whatever, because an updated implementation will write the v1 alpha 2 new version. I'm not sure how to accomplish this in code and just like, what do I need to change? What are the ramifications of it? And are there any notes that we need for implementations and for end users for migrating? And if nobody has immediate answers, it's okay. I just this is where I'm stuck currently, and I'm trying to get this figured out to wrap this up.
It's a good question. I need to go see what our Kubernetes policies say about alpha versions and whatnot, and we have a lot more flexibility to kind of make the changes. It's opt-in. There's customers, users decide how they want to adopt the new versions. Still, breaking changes are super scary.
I hope that they're less scary in this case because the resource that we're breaking is not intended to be written by an end user, but still.
Right. But if you have active services and you install the new version and there's a break, there's a break.
Yeah. And that's what I need to figure out is like, what happens in that scenario, and like, what the implementations need to update in order to handle this.
Right.
So I think breaking change are allowed for Alpha APIs.
They're
And
allowed, yes.
to handle
Yeah.
that properly, the controller should generate Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 simultaneously, basically dual write. Then on the consumer side, they can slowly migrate to use Alpha 2, right? So basically the controller which generates service import should generate Alpha 1 and Alpha 2. Is that even possible actually?
I don't think that's possible.
No, because there's one storage version, right?
Yeah.
I see.
It is probably okay to, since it's alpha, like I want to go check the policies before making any firm statements. I think it's probably okay to just change the storage version to 2 and say controllers need to handle them both. If you want to upgrade, or call it a breaking change because it's still alpha. Like that, I think that's an option for implementations as well.
So I think setting storage version to the V1 Alpha 2 service import has to happen, because that's where we want things to live. What I'm fuzzy on is should or should I not delete the V1 Alpha 1 folder?
Yeah. So it's I was looking for one of my colleagues ran into issues and documented them recently. Paste the link in the chat. But I think we need to keep. Well, we can change the storage version, but we need to keep the old folder as well. Otherwise, some tools like OLM will stop the upgrade because they'll see that the CRD stops declaring V1 Alpha 1, and there are still objects in storage with V1 Alpha 1.
That's the concern that I have is yeah, it's okay for them to break, but for Cube storage version migrator and things like that, it's will it block the upgrade unless you delete a thing which a controller is actively reconciling and trying to recreate?
Yeah. Plus, you can't do it anyway because, well, you can't migrate the storage unless you have a CRD that supports both.
Well, so it doesn't need to migrate it. It's okay to have data loss on the V1 Alpha 1.
On the imports.
On the import side, yes.
Yeah, but the issue is that as long as if you try to install a new controller that is going to use V1 Alpha 2, then if the corresponding CRD no longer declares V1 Alpha 1, the upgrade might not be possible. So you might not be able to install the controller at all.
Okay. So keep V1 Alpha 1.
Yeah.
V1 Alpha 2 storage version. And on the service export side, it's simpler. I think I can just keep them both, and
you might not even need to declare a new version.
Well, so I think eventually, a next release or whatever, we eventually want this, what's the path to V1 beta 1 after this? Yeah, I guess that's the question is if I'm doing a V1 Alpha 2 of service import, do I also need one of service export? I had thought that I should have that, even if it's just copy paste identical.
Well, if you look at the core objects in Cube, there's loads with different versions. So I don't think there's...
Yeah.
I don't think it's required.
Okay. Okay, so then maybe
everything will be aligned again once we get to, well, V1 beta 1 definitely, and then
V1 beta 1, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so
sounds
storage.
We can keep the export at V1 Alpha 1. Only move the input to V1 Alpha 2, and then when we get to V1 beta 1, then everybody goes back to together. Reunite.
Yep. I think that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. That saves some actual copy paste work, right?
Yeah. Thank you for talking me through this. This is exactly the kind of feedback I was hoping for. I'll make those changes in the PR, and then I'll tag it for review.
Thanks.
Cool. That's it from me. Thanks, all.
Okay, and last but not least is John with a quick PSA.
Yep. So just last week, we merged a PR to test infra to create some new pre-submit jobs for the MCS API repo. So now whenever you open a PR there, you'll get some unit tests run and build and EDE tests. And all the jobs are passing. I see one of them is passing even though the steps seem to be failing. So I need to take a look at that. But otherwise, I think things are looking pretty good. So let me know if you have any issues. But all the jobs are optional right now, so nothing should be blocking PRs from merging. But I think we would like to get to a point somewhat soon where we can make those jobs block PRs. So yeah, just please let me know if you have any feedback or see any issues there. That was all I had. Does anybody have any questions or anything else? Cool.
So
that was all I had.
I have a
But
couple
yeah,
of
go ahead, Stephen.
couple of comments that are tangentially related. Not about the test on the pull request, but being able to use the in progress conformance suite elsewhere. So ideally we want to tag the repo at some point. And so I was wondering too if so preparing for a tag probably means looking at the versions of all our dependencies so that they kind of make sense in the current ecosystem, but probably not too new either. So that's one question. How far back what if people want to import MCS API, what do we impose on them in terms of dependencies? And so that leads to my second thought, which is, do we want to split the MCS API repo into multiple modules, or perhaps even multiple repos? Because we currently have the MCS API itself with the generated client. Then which is one thing in my mind, and then there's E2E, which is a different thing, and then conformance, which is another different thing. So I wondered if people had any thoughts, or whether there, well, for instance, what does Gateway API do about this?
These things in Gateway are all close enough. They're part of the same repo. Like conformance tests are in the same repo as the spec itself. And yeah, I think that this still feels all scoped to the same project. Once you start getting a bit further away of like complementary projects or other, like we just recently moved out Gateway Cuddle, which is like a command line utility to interact with Gateway resources. That's pretty clearly a separate project, and even that, it like incubated within the Gateway API repo for a year. All the test stuff, it feels like it belongs in the same place, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It makes sense to have it in the same repo. I was thinking more in terms of stuff we force on consumers through go.mod in particular. And does it make sense to split things up there? Yeah, it's a bit late in the call perhaps to discuss things like that.
Yeah. It's not as easy to split out like dev dependencies in go.mod as it is in other languages, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or test
Yep.
dependencies.
That's obnoxious.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll write up something more concrete perhaps for the next call.
Yeah. I don't know if there's some way to structure it as a different package or something like that.
Yeah, you can do that with modules. So I did that already for the tools.
Okay.
There's so that we don't have a dependency on code generator and controller tools.
Something like that feels like it could be a way around that if we have a good plan there.
Yeah.
Just take some thinking.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, so there were a couple of comments in the chat there. Yeah, and users migrating service import resource version doesn't actually matter because it's an internal resource. Yeah. Yeah, so they really, well, that's what we were saying earlier. It doesn't matter if the import data gets lost because it can be recreated. What we have to take care of is that we don't prevent upgrades by deleting stuff too soon from the CRDs.
Exactly, and that we have like the right guidance for controllers on like,
yeah, implementers.
They should still read from the service export and then start writing the V1 Alpha 2 and like what order of like installing the new CRDs and what happens. And like warning users that like when you upgrade the CRDs, like what's going to happen, or like what order your controller needs to be upgraded in. So
yeah,
it's the mechanics to figure out is all.
Yeah, and exciting scenarios too, where you have one cluster that gets upgraded to V1 Alpha 2, but not another one.
I hope that wouldn't matter, like, because you're still at the end of the day using like the cluster DNS to address it.
Yeah,
if you have an
it won't
older
matter
version
to
of the thing
consumers.
writing,
I'm
yeah.
thinking more about
Yeah.
controller implementers. Because the controller would have to deal with that.
Yeah, we need to figure out the right guidance for controller implementers on knowing what version they're writing and what order you upgrade things in. Of like if you install a newer version of the controller before the new CRDs or something. I don't. Yeah, we need to figure it out.
That won't work, but yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. By consumers, I mean controllers that watch service import APIs. Yeah, they'll need to take care of those as well. Yeah, upgrades are always fun. Anyway, that's it for today, I think. So thank you everybody for attending, unless there are any last minute comments. No.
Thanks, everyone.
See you around.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye bye.